Okay.
All right. So, Amy Waninger, welcome to Quoted. And I've got a funny smile on my face because much like the other people that introduced you, I had a little bit of fear in my eyes because I wanted to make sure I said your name right, because you go out of your way to make sure that you look out for people's names. You called me Pat the Shopper when we met, and that meant a lot to me. So again, Amy, welcome to Quoted.
Thank you very much. I'm so glad to be here.
So today is exciting for me, and I've done a lot of business bookshelf reviews on my LinkedIn page. I think I try to at least tell people that I love reading. It's something I do on a daily basis. And so for me, I'm extremely excited because I have an author, somebody that wrote a book that was impactful in my life with us today. And I just want to dive into it. So I know you told me you were going to have a lot of questions for me. So I'm back to being nervous, but why don't you introduce your book and
Sure.
introduce what got you started, why you decided to write it, and then we'll go from there.
You bet. So my book is called Network Beyond Bias, Making Diversity a Competitive Advantage for Your Career. And the reason I wrote this book was because, and I don't remember who said it, but somebody very famously said, if you can't find the book you want to read, you have to be the one to write it. And I was doing diversity and inclusion work kind of on a volunteer basis at my employer for a number of years. Prior to that, I had been, in college, I wanted to be a civil rights attorney. I was a African-American studies major, criminal justice major. These were all things that were very, very important to me for a very long time. But my senior year of college, I learned how much law school would cost, and I learned what pro bono meant. And I decided that law school was not going to be for me. So I sort of put all of that aside for a while, and I went to work in information technology, almost the same thing. And and then ended up in the insurance industry, like a lot of us by accident, that a company was hiring, and there I was. And when I recognized the diversity and inclusion initiatives that were going on in the company where I was employed, I thought, oh, wow, you can do that and get a paycheck. That's really cool. And so I started looking into that. How would I go about doing that? How would I turn this thing that I love into something that I could do to help people and, to feed my family? And I kept looking at all the literature for, how do you even get started? If somebody like me wanted to be more inclusive, if somebody like me wanted to not just think about feeling the right way, right? I think my heart's in the right place, but how do I move my feet in the right direction? And I kept coming up short. Everything I would read would kind of tell me how to get my heart in the right place. And I felt like I was already there. And so I thought, well, what would that look like if I were going to tell somebody, number one, why should you care for your career, right? Why is this a business priority for you, not for a CEO or a vice president of HR, but why for you, Pat, would this be an important thing to do? And then once I've got you one over on why it's important, how do you get started? And that book didn't exist, so I had to write it.
I like that. That's we talk about on the business side of startups a lot, that it's like scratching an itch, that there's two kinds of founders, ones that see a business opportunity for the financials, and then someone that's perhaps more in the industry and sees a problem that they just can't help but solve. And so to tie that into the book, I think it pinpoints why maybe I liked it, because it wasn't just focused on this is what you need to do, right? And that's always, that's always the part of it where you're like, I can digest a lot of information, but how do I put it into practice? And the thing that I really took away from your book, and even watching the interviews, I mean, certainly the impact you've had on me, but I know this has happened because I've watched other people that have been interviewed after they've heard you talk or read your book. And I used it the other day on Twitter. Someone said, would you rather have one person by your side that really understands what you're doing, or would you rather have 100 people that really don't necessarily know your mission? I said, I want the 100 people. And I tied that right back to you, because the diversity aspect of it, the value that will come out of that, and read the book. I don't want to take too much, but the value on the business development side of it that comes with the diversity piece that you're talking about is a business strategy. And it, certainly I want to do things because it's the right thing to do, but I want it to be sustainable, and I want it to be something that I can get the attention of other people. And you've done that with your book.
Thank you.
So the second piece, and I just talked about it, was the speaking. Now, I've read your book, and I've been fortunate enough I got to hang out with you too. So I've heard you speak, but I've also hung out with you, and I walked right up and I said, hey, I'm a big fan of the work you're doing. And you hung out with me for an hour before you went and talked for another hour. So
was it an hour? Oh, wow.
It went fast, right? Like
it did. It was great.
I'm just such a good conversationalist, right?
You are.
But in truly going back to Insurance Nerds Day, which is our first, in-person interaction, the talk that you gave was impactful, and maybe I'll touch on that after. But when you go into a speaking engagement, I've seen you at conferences, I've seen you on site with businesses. What is your objective when you're going into there? Because you only have so much time with a group. What are some of the things that you're really trying to drive home when you're doing the in-person, when you're doing the speaking engagements?
Yeah, so I want to make sure that people understand that this is very personal for me, and that I'm not perfect, and I don't claim to be perfect. I'm learning just like everyone else, and I make mistakes all the time. And I've tried to learn from those mistakes. That's all any of us can do, right? And so I try to tell a lot of personal stories so people get to know me and can kind of see themselves in those stories. But I really have three objectives when I'm speaking to a room. Number one is I want them to understand that they're making decisions all the time, whether they realize it or not. And it's those decisions we make without realizing it that get us into trouble. Number two, I want to help them make better decisions by recognizing that, kind of teaching them some techniques to just take a breath, right? And recognize what's going on internally, recognize what's going on externally. I almost said outternally. That's not a word. Externally, and process that information purposefully and make a decision on purpose. And then the third thing is to recognize that the impacts of making those decisions without paying attention to it is that your world gets smaller and smaller and smaller, because you tend to surround yourself with a whole bunch of people just like you. And if you can get beyond that, if you can make different decisions and get beyond that comfort zone of people who are just like you, you're really going to learn, and you're really going to take off, and you're going to create opportunity, not just for yourself, but for everybody around you, because now you know people who have all sorts of different things to offer. And I get all excited, so I'll calm down.
Don't, please bring the passion, because that's the fun part about it. That's what I tell people. Like, I meet these cool people. I do quote it so that you get to meet them.
I'm going to real quick kind of go into a little bit of history and then bring us back to the present. So for a lot of years, and not that long ago, women were really not at all welcome in workplaces, in business places, unless they were in very low level, very underpaid or low paying roles. They were typically objectified, and they were typically allowed to be there only on certain unspoken conditions. And those conditions were that they were attractive enough to sit at the front desk and bring in men, or that they were willing to play along or at least look the other way when men behave badly in the workplace, and certainly stayed in their place. And I'm not talking 100 years ago. I'm talking like when I was a kid, this is what was going on. So, and I'm not that old. Like, I'm old compared to like college students, but I'm not that old, right? I remember very vividly in the 80s, like that was the culture for women at work. And so, we're not that far away from that, right? And now I think what women are saying is, look, we don't like those rules. We don't want to be hired for our looks. We don't want to be pigeonholed because of our gender. We don't want to be treated disrespectfully. And if you're mentoring us, that should not come with an expectation that we are going to flirt or consent to things that we aren't comfortable with, or turn the other way when we see it happening to others. And I think those are reasonable expectations of someone in a workplace, right? I don't think, Pat, that you would go to work if every day you were demeaned by the people around you, you were told never to have an opinion, and it was expected that you would do things that made you feel uncomfortable just to keep your job, right? And so that's what women are saying, right? Like, this is not okay. And men, it seems, some men are saying, oh, well, if you're not going to play by our rules, we won't talk to you at all. So you're either being kept out because you're not willing to go along with this really kind of sexualized notion of who you should be at work, right? But then if you can't do that, like, we're just not going to talk to you. And I find that problematic for a lot of reasons. And I don't know why. I'm not insulted by the question. I'm insulted by the question existing. Do you know what I mean? Like, why is that a problem for men? Like, and to that, I would say, if you're a manager or if you manage people who say, I can't work with 50% of the population because I can't trust them to look the other way when I behave badly, maybe the problem isn't where you're pointing your fingers. So one of the things that I know that a lot of men will say is, well, I can't be alone with a woman, right? Because it might be misinterpreted. And the flip of that is, and I mean no offense by this, but a lot of women don't want to be alone with men either, because we don't know what to expect. So instead of mentoring one woman, mentor 5. You can take a group of women out for coffee, right? You can take a group of people, of different genders to dinner, and then they can all learn from each other in addition to learning from you. So it doesn't have to be this one-on-one awkward sort of thing, right? Make it obvious what you're doing, that you're invested in 3 or 4 people's growth, and you want them to learn from each other. But don't just have one woman there, right? Make it balanced.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the core of why I asked that question. That leads probably into the business side, even, again, the book, the speaking engagements, kind of that tangent question is a good lead in, because that's the second time I've come to you, I think, about a topic that I saw it in the news. I want to understand that more. Mm-hmm. But you do a consulting business as well, and people can, again, hopefully they want to grow and mm-hmm. want to get better at this. Let's talk about some of the work that you do on that front as well.
Okay, sure. So I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Lead at Any Level, LLC. And I offer a number of services. One is I will come in and do live programs. If travel doesn't work out, I can do online things like we're doing now. But I prefer to be live because I think it helps me connect with folks and answer questions a little bit more in line with context, rather than, it's harder when you don't know somebody and they ask you something, like kind of understanding what's behind that if you're not sitting in the room with them. So I'm available for programming. I am also available for, consulting around what is the work environment here and how can we make it more inclusive for people? How can we address some of these things, workshopping, role playing, those kinds of activities where I can really help kind of look at a culture with new eyes and ask some tough questions that maybe the people who are there are unable, unwilling, or uncomfortable asking. And, we can build in some accountability, at all levels, really, around how to treat people and how to be more respectful.
Very good. So I guess at this point, we've really covered the parts of your business that hopefully get people engaged with you. You are on Twitter, you're on LinkedIn, you have a newsletter.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just naming off the things that I obviously follow along with. But what's a takeaway? It stinks that, I always tell people we try to keep it in that 15 to 20 minute window because it's a good chance to get a little bit of a introduction to somebody, and then you can go and learn more after that. But what's one of the biggest takeaways? Now you and I have been on the phone for multiple times now. We've interacted in person, and then obviously social media. What's a big takeaway that somebody like me, I'm a solo founder, but I just network with people based on talent, but I'm totally cognizant of the world around me. I don't want to ignore it. What's a major takeaway that somebody like me can utilize before we come to you, before we bring you in?
So I think the biggest thing is if you don't understand someone's perspective, if you don't understand a different perspective, do some research. Some people don't mind if you ask the question, but a lot of folks are tired of answering the questions. And, I'm happy to. I've put myself out there in the public eye to answer these kinds of questions, and I'm happy to do so. But don't always rely on the one person who identifies with the problem, right? Or who may be suffering from the problem to educate you. There's a whole world out there of books and media, and the internet is a very big place, and it's not that hard to go find out, like, why is this a problem for people? Why is this offensive? What are the implications? So I'm going to give you two takeaways. And the other one is, that was one. And then the other one is, when we hurt people at work, it does not look good for us. And it doesn't matter how small those injuries are and whether they're internal or external. If we keep hurting people after we know better, especially after we know better, but even before we know better, if we keep doing that, it damages our careers as well. And so if you can't figure this out for other people because you just can't get there at this point, think about how hurting others will hurt you in the long run, and what kind of reputation and brand that's going to build for you.
Yeah, and I think that's such a great way to end it, because that's the piece that you and I talked about when we first met, was just being inclusive. And I hope that, I continue to grow. No.
Me too. I hope I do too.
Right. And that's where you lead from. I think that's where that leadership part from my perspective really stems when it comes to you, is that you do lead from example, but also from a place that's consistently open to understanding where people are coming from. So, Amy, I can't thank you enough for, just sharing time with me today, allowing me to interview you, and
thank you.
Giving me a place to feel comfortable to ask questions, because I think this stuff matters in the biggest way, and, saying it isn't enough. So I'm going to continue to champion your work. I hope a lot of other people are able to track down your book. That'll be at the end here. I hope people are able to hopefully catch you in person or on a webinar. But thank you so much for being a leader, not just in the insurance space, but just being a leader, putting yourself out there. I know it's not easy, and I imagine, just like anything else, you probably get the negative feedback as well. So to make sure we balance that out, Amy, thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you so much. Thank you.